Merrie was not only the most beautiful girl in school, but also a standout cheerleader. As far as I was concerned, she was the most stunning girl in town. I was the quarterback and captain of the football team. It felt like a match made in heaven. 9 years later, I saw it as a match made in hell. Merrie was still as gorgeous as ever, even after 2 kids, but she had turned into a stone-cold nightmare. I'm talking about a nightmare with a capital N. About 3 years ago, she began to get moody and started drinking heavily. Despite my countless attempts to understand what was wrong or what was bothering her, all I got were dismissive responses like, "There's nothing wrong with me," and eventually, "Leave me the hell alone." Our once fiery love life dwindled from being frequent to just a few times a week, then a few times a month. Her drinking worsened, and she began to embarrass herself at various events by getting smashed and doing ridiculous things. She would belittle me in front of others, flirt with other guys, including some of my friends, and make a complete fool out of me. She made advances toward to other guys, leading them on and letting herself be groped on the dance floor. There were times she'd sneak off with someone, or at least she thought she was being discreet. I kept a close watch, always ready to follow if she was gone too long. She never stayed away long enough to do more than kiss or flirt, but it was noticeable to others, and I received several pitying glances that I pretended not to see. I eventually reached a breaking point. It seemed clear to me that we were headed for a nasty divorce in the near future. I spent a couple of weeks contemplating the situation and, anticipating a rough time ahead, devised a plan to maintain control if and when the divorce happened. By the time I had solidified the plan, I decided not to wait for the inevitable, but to force the issue. I realized I couldn't change her and couldn't continue living like this, so it was best to end it. There was no doubt in my mind that sooner or later Merrie would sneak off from a party and cheat on me. If I could catch her in the act, I'd have the upper hand. Once I made that decision, I decided to set things up and make it happen. It might sound cold-blooded, but I knew it was going to happen eventually, so I might as well get some advantage out of it. I arranged for my parents to take the kids for the weekend and took Merrie out to a local bar. It was Friday night, and the bar had a band. As I expected, Merrie drank too much and became obnoxious. That night, Merrie danced several times with Jim Reynolds. Reynolds had been her high school boyfriend before she dropped him for me, and he'd held a grudge ever since. At the height of her drunkenness, as Reynolds had his hand on her ass, Merrie started openly disrespecting me. I walked onto the dance floor, pulled her away from Reynolds, and told her we were going home. She reacted with the expected tirade, so I told her she could walk home if she wanted and left her there. I parked the car in a hidden spot and waited to see what would happen. About 30 minutes later, Merrie and Reynolds appeared, walking hand in hand towards the dumpsters behind the bar. I got out of the car and crept over to a cluster of trees where I could observe them without being seen. I had my Canon Rebel with me, loaded with low-light film and ready. The dumpsters were under a parking lot light, which I hoped would help with the clarity of the shots. The pair lit up a joint, and then Jim made his move, putting his arm around Merrie. She didn't resist, and they proceeded to have sex. I heard some noise to my right and saw 2 acquaintances, Tony Anson and Mike Bella, coming out of the bar and heading towards us. They spotted Merrie and Reynolds, who were making quite a commotion, and drew closer to watch. They stayed at a distance while trying to figure out who was involved. When they recognized Merrie, Tony said, "Isn't that Barry's wife? I didn't know she was cheating on him." Mike replied, "I've always wanted a shot at her. Now that I know she's into that, I'm going to try my luck." Tony agreed. "I'm with you on that." The 2 of them watched as Merrie cleaned Jim off, and I thought about how fortunate I was to have witnesses and additional material for my plan. Afterwards, Reynolds and Merrie composed themselves, and he offered to drive her home. I quickly headed back to my car and raced to beat them to the house. Once I arrived, I stripped off and prepared the bed, then positioned myself at the window with the lights out so I could keep an eye on things without being noticed from outside. I expected Merrie and Reynolds to pull into the driveway, share a brief kiss, and then have Merrie come inside ready to confront me for leaving her. But that's not how it went. They pulled into the driveway and shared a brief kiss, but then moved to the back seat where Reynolds made love to Merrie once more. Almost as if daring me to catch them, Reynolds then walked her to the front porch and sat on the top step. I was furious, not only because of their blatant behavior, but also because I couldn't capture any photos of it. When Merrie finally came inside, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. Despite her efforts to be quiet, her intoxicated state made her clumsy and noisy. She got into bed and was snoring within minutes. The next day brought an unexpected twist. After spending the morning working in the yard, I decided to take a shower around noon. I had barely started when Merrie unexpectedly pulled back the shower curtain and joined me. She took the soap and washcloth from me and began washing my back. We ended up making love right there in the shower. It was surprising, especially since it had been a month since we'd last been intimate, and even then, I had to practically coax her into it. But Merrie wasn't finished with her surprises. We spent the rest of the day together in the bedroom, enjoying each other's company until it was time to pick up the kids. For the next month and a half, she was incredibly pleasant. She showed respect, and we were making love 4 or 5 times a week. Everything seemed to return to the way it was when we first got married. I started to think that she might be trying to make amends for her actions with Reynolds, and I began to wonder if a divorce might not happen after all. About a month later, I got off work a couple of hours early and happened to see Merrie's car parked in front of a house. For some reason, I decided to park and keep an eye on the car. About 45 minutes before I was due home, Merrie emerged from the house with Jim Reynolds. As they reached her car, they embraced and kissed, and Reynolds even had his hand on her ass as she got in. The sight of them filled me with rage. I wanted to confront them both and lash out, but I knew I needed to stick to my plan. All thoughts of the divorce possibly being avoided vanished. I drove home at my usual time, and when Merrie greeted me with a passionate kiss, she said, "I hope you have plenty of energy. I'm planning on a lot of dessert tonight." I almost retorted, "Sorry, but I don't do sloppy seconds." But I held back. I didn't want to reveal that I knew about her infidelity. I went online and found exactly what I needed, and then some. Between spytech.com, brickhouseSecurity.com, and backstreetsurveillance.com, I could equip my house with hidden cameras almost anywhere. There were options for cameras disguised as books, smoke detectors, mantle clocks, bedside alarm clocks, picture frames, mirror frames, electrical outlets, and even a teddy bear with a camera lens hidden in one of its eyes. I paid with a credit card, requested overnight delivery, and had everything shipped to my office. It wasn't cheap, but I anticipated it would be worth every penny when it came time for the divorce. Once the equipment arrived, I had to wait for Merrie to drive her mother to her weekly doctor's appointment for a blood check. Her mother had a heart condition that required regular INR level monitoring due to blood thinners. I watched from down the street, and as soon as Merrie left, I went in with all my spy gear and set everything up. The next part was risky and could backfire, but it had to be done. I called Mike and Tony, who had witnessed Merrie and Reynolds together, and asked them to meet me for a beer at Bud's bar after work. Tony was already there when I arrived, and Mike showed up shortly after. I bought us around and then got straight to the point. You guys were at the landing strip 2 months ago when I had that argument with Merrie and stormed out, leaving her there. A half-mile down the road, I realized I'd made a mistake and decided to turn back. When I got there, Merrie and Jim Reynolds were just coming out, hand in hand, heading toward the dumpsters. I decided to see what they were up to, so I parked the car and went to hide behind the trees near the dumpsters. You both saw what happened that night when you left the bar and saw Merrie and Reynolds together. I was furious enough to lose my cool, but I held back because I didn't want to end up in prison. I decided to go for a divorce. Later, after Merrie came home so drunk that she didn't seem to know what she was doing, I began to think Reynolds had taken advantage of her. At this point, I signaled Maggie for another round and continued. Where was I? Right. For the next few months, Merrie went out of her way to pamper me, and I started to think maybe we could work things out. But last week, I came home early and discovered she was with Reynolds again. That's when I decided I couldn't tolerate her cheating any longer. You're probably wondering why I'm sharing all this. It's simple. I need your help to ensure a smooth divorce. As you both know, divorces often leave the guy getting the short end of the stick, and I don't want that to be me. That night, you saw Reynolds with Merrie, and I heard you both express interest in her. So here's what I need. I want you both to sleep with her, and if you know anyone else who'd be interested, have them do the same. You're kidding, right? You want us to sleep with your wife? That's exactly what I'm asking. I want you both to have your turn and get anyone else you know who's interested to do the same. I've got a private investigator gathering evidence. If I can prove that she's been unfaithful, I believe I can secure custody of my kids. Mike asked, how am I supposed to do that if she's always with Reynolds? Catch her when she isn't with him. In the mornings, she's alone until she heads out to meet Reynolds. This coming week is ideal because it's Easter vacation, and the kids are staying with their grandparents at the farm. You can park down the block, and when I leave for work, you go up to the house. When she answers the door, ask her how much she wants to save her marriage. Then, let her know you saw what happened at the strip and that the price for keeping that quiet is a bit of what she was giving Reynolds. Don't let her stall with "I'll think about it" nonsense. Tell her you want her in the bedroom right now, or you'll head to my office to spill everything. She'll give in. After you've been with her, tell her you want more and that you'll be back. When you go, bring a friend or two. My goal is for you to make her your plaything for a week or so. While one of you is with her, the others can snap photos with a cell phone when she isn't looking. Those photos will help you get her to comply. I can even arrange a fake business trip for 3 or 4 days so you can be with her around the clock if you want. I want the private investigator to gather so much evidence that no court would ever grant her custody of the kids or significant alimony. The best part is, once she's been with you, she'll be your personal affair, and when I kick her out, you can continue with her as long as you like. So, what do you say? Want to help me out? Mike glanced at Tony and then back at me. I'm in. Count me in too, Tony added. I signaled Maggie and ordered another round. When I got home, Merrie wasn't there. I found a note on the kitchen table saying she'd taken some clothes out to the farm for the kids and would probably be late, so I should microwave some leftovers for dinner. I wondered if her lateness was due to a detour to see Reynolds, but surprisingly, I wasn't upset. I'd already moved on. I was in bed when she returned and pretended to be asleep. The next morning I left the house as usual, but drove around the block and turned the corner onto our street, just as Mike and Tony pulled into the driveway. I watched as they went up to the door and rang the bell. Merrie answered, and after a brief conversation, she tried to close the door on them. They stopped her, said something, and then Merrie turned and let them into the house. Tony and Mike exchanged smiles and high-fived before following her inside. I couldn't help but grin as I drove to work. The day flew by, and around lunchtime I received a call from Tony. She caved, just like you said she would. We're going to see her tomorrow after you leave for work. I'll tell her tonight that I'm heading out of town on business for 4 days. Make the most of it, and have a great time. I never thought I'd thank someone for setting up a chance to be with his wife, but here I am. Thanks, man. I've wanted her since high school. Just enjoy, I replied. After work, I'd rushed home, hoping Merrie wouldn't be there so I could check the recorder. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on my side. Merrie was at home, and she had dinner ready. In a surprisingly good mood, she made moves that suggested she was interested in some intimacy, something that hadn't happened in the past 2 weeks. It was unusual because lately she'd been finding excuses to say no. I could see I caught her off guard when I didn't respond to her advances. I was definitely interested, but there was no way I was going to sleep with Merrie without a condom, especially considering her affairs with Jim, Tony, Mike, and possibly others. Insisting on a condom might make her suspect that I knew more than I let on, and I didn't want her putting 2 and 2 together. I told her I had to go out of town on business for at least 4 days, and she didn't react. I desperately wanted to leave the house and drive around the block to use the remote feature to view the day's footage on the recorder, but I couldn't come up with a plausible excuse to do so. I would have to wait until the next day. I packed a bag before going to bed, and the next morning Merrie gave me a lukewarm kiss as I said goodbye and left the house. After work, I headed to the other side of town and checked into a motel. Then, I drove to the airport, parked in the long-term lot, and rented a compact car from Avis. From there, I drove back to our neighborhood and parked a block away from the house. I set up my laptop and connected to the wireless recorder hidden in the garage. After logging in, I accessed the live feed and cycled through the cameras until I found Merrie. She was lying on her back on the kitchen table, while Reynolds was with her. I couldn't help but wonder why they chose the kitchen table instead of our bedroom, or one of the other rooms. As I continued watching, Tony entered the scene. 2 minutes later, Mike walked in carrying a 12-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon and placed it in the fridge. Once he arrived, Merrie got off the kitchen table, and the three of them left the room. I switched between the cameras and followed them as they entered our bedroom. Merrie stripped the bed down to the bottom sheet, and the three of them started to get intimate. As they were engaged, another man entered the room. I didn't recognize him, but he seemed familiar with Merrie, as he quickly began to undress. I watched as Merrie was intimate with the three men, and I felt a surge of rage, wanting to storm into the house and confront them. The only thing holding me back was the fact that I had orchestrated this situation. Even so, it was painful to see the woman I once loved in such a compromising position, and she seemed to be thoroughly enjoying it. As the activity in the bedroom grew repetitive, I switched to review the earlier recorded footage. I saw Merrie get up from the kitchen table to answer the doorbell. "Hi, Merrie," Tony said as she opened the door. "What are you guys doing here? Barry has already left for work." "We know. We saw him leave." "I don't understand." "We're here to talk to you, not Barry. We've got a proposition." "A proposition? What kind of proposition?" "We've both wanted to be with you since high school." Merrie tried to close the door, but Tony stopped her and said, "If you give us a taste, we won't tell Barry about you and Jim Reynolds." "Are you out of your mind? Get out of here!" "If we leave now, we'll call Barry and tell him about your affair with Jim. We'll also mention seeing you leave Jim's place last week. Do you really want that?" Merrie hesitated, staring at them for about 20 seconds before turning and walking back into the house, with Mike and Tony following. I couldn't bear to watch anymore, and fast-forwarded to the moment when Mike and Tony left. As soon as they were gone, Merrie picked up the phone and made a call. "We have a problem," she said into the receiver. "Mike Bella and Tony Anson were just here. They know about us and threatened to tell Barry if I didn't comply." "Of course I did. What choice did I have?" "What do you mean? What did I do? It was just like what you and Kenny do with me." "Don't be ridiculous. Of course I enjoyed it. I wasn't paying attention, and Mike took cell phone pictures of me with Tony. They're coming back tomorrow. What should I do?" "Oh, great. It's easy for you to say that." "Well, you've been pushing me to do a gangbang. Would you, Kenny, Mike, and Tony be enough, or do you need more?" "Don't be absurd. He's completely clueless. We've been at this for 3 years, and he hasn't figured it out." "Okay. See you then?" I was seething with rage. 3 years. She'd been cheating on me for 3 years? The betrayal had been a part of our marriage for a third of our life together, or maybe even longer. Was Jim the first? I wondered if I needed to check the paternity of our kids, but no, I wouldn't do that. They were my children, and I had been there for them since birth. I wasn't going to give them up. I powered down the laptop and made my way to the motel. I needed a drink. No, make that several drinks. The bar next door seemed like a good place to start. I settled onto a stool and ordered a Budweiser, trying to clear my mind and figure out my next steps. I needed a lawyer, and I needed to plan how to make Reynolds pay for what he'd done. There was no doubt about it. I was going to make him regret crossing me. As I sipped my second beer, a woman slid onto the stool next to me. She tapped me on the shoulder and asked, "Looking for some company, stud?" I immediately assumed she was a hooker and was about to decline when she said, "Was I that easy to forget?" I turned to look at her more closely and then grinned. "Shelley, how have you been?" "About as well as you," she replied. "Really? That bad?" "Yep, for the same reason." "And what's that?" "I'm not here by chance. I followed you when you left your neighborhood." "What?" I asked, confused. "I was following my husband. I've suspected he's been cheating, so tonight I trailed him to your place. I planned to park around the corner, sneak up, and peek through a window to catch him with your wife. When I saw you sitting in your car, I thought you might be doing the same. When you pulled away, I followed. Who's your husband? I asked. Kenny Hauser. I studied her and asked, why would any sane man cheat on you? I could ask you the same thing. Why would any sane woman cheat on you? We really messed up picking our partners, I said. I found out tonight that Merrie's been cheating on me with Jim Reynolds for at least 3 years. What are you going to do? They're being recorded as we speak. I'm going to use the footage to end things with her. Any chance I could get a copy of that footage to catch Kenny? It'll cost you. What do you mean? A date with me once we've dealt with the dead weight. Why do we have to wait? I don't want to risk giving Merrie anything she could use against me in a countersuit. Dinner, drinks, and things like dancing or going to the movies won't be an issue. We just need to avoid any inappropriate touching. I'm not sure, sweetie. I had a hard time keeping my hands off you when we used to date, and you've only gotten more attractive since high school. I guess I'll need to supply the willpower for both of us. When are you planning to drop Merrie? I'm supposed to be away on a long business trip right now. She'll have 4 days to dig her own grave. I've already met with a lawyer and just need to gather the evidence. I'll head home Friday night or Saturday morning, use the weekend to compile the tapes of her actions, and then confront her on Tuesday or Wednesday. I should be able to get you copies by Monday evening. I'll see an attorney tomorrow and try to catch Kenny when you go after Merrie. So our first date will be the weekend after we've cleaned up our mess, right? Absolutely. The following night I returned, parked the usual block away, and checked the recorder footage. I saw Reynolds, Mike, Tony, and a man I assumed was Kenny with Merrie. It was a bizarre experience. My anger towards her was intense, yet I was paradoxically drawn to the scene. I fast-forwarded through the footage and saw Reynolds and 3 other unfamiliar men making love to Merrie. It left me questioning if I ever truly knew her at all. The night began with a poker game, which was infuriating enough on its own. Merrie had always refused to let me host poker nights at our house, but there she was, strutting around naked, serving my beer, my booze, and my food to the players. I was so enraged that I had to pull over, open the car door, and vomit on the ground. For a moment, I almost stormed into the house to confront them all, but I managed to pull myself together. I shut down the laptop, drove back to the motel, and stumbled into the bar next door, where I drank myself into a stupor. The next morning, I was so wrecked that I had to call in sick to work. After a breakfast that must have included 10 gallons of black coffee, I knew it was time to end this. I checked out of the motel and drove to the airport to pick up my car. With a few hours to kill before evening, I planned to make the most of it and ruin their night. I parked my usual block away, set up my laptop, and clicked on the real-time feed icon. I called Merrie's cell, and when the phone rang in the house, I heard her briefly interrupt her activities to say, "Someone bring me the phone. It might be Doofus calling for his nightly check-in." "Hello," she answered. "Hi, baby. I finished early and just left the airport. I'll be home in a bit." "Oh, goody. I can't wait to see you. I'm feeling pretty damned horny right now. Be ready for some exercise when you get here." Her face turned pale as I disconnected the call. I heard her curse under her breath. "God damn the worthless fuck! He wasn't supposed to be home until tomorrow." She got to her feet and shouted, "Everybody out! The idiot is on his way, and I need to clean this place up." Kenny replied, "We've got time. It'll take him 45 minutes to get here from the airport." "He said he'd already left the airport. He could be halfway home by now. Everyone out. The last thing I need is for him to come home and find all of you here. I have to get this place straightened up." The guys grumbled, but started packing up. All except Jim Reynolds, who said, "I'll help you clean up." "No, he can't catch you here. When he gets here, I'll slip out the back door. I'm parked across the street, so he won't see me. I'll start tidying up while you go change." "I'm not changing. I'll just tell him I dressed up to welcome him home." As they got busy cleaning up, I came up with an idea. I stepped out of the car, grabbed the tire iron from the truck, and made a quick decision. The house I was parked in front of belonged to my neighbor, Tim, an 18-year-old who might be able to help. I rang the doorbell, and Tim answered. I need a favor, I said. I'm supposed to be out of town on business, but I want to surprise my wife and her lover. When they see my car, her lover will bolt out the back. I need someone to be there to greet him. Doing what? Tim asked. Just need you to be there when he runs out. I'll pay you $20. Cool, Tim replied. I handed him 2 20s and we made a quick deal. I took the tire iron, climbed the back fence, and positioned myself on the porch. I heard footsteps, and then the back door flew open. Reynolds came rushing out, right into the tire iron I swung at his face. Teeth flew as he hit the ground. Merrie, frozen in the doorway, watched in horror as I dealt with her lover. Pack your bags and be out of the house by the time I'm done here, or you will be next. I pulled out my cell and dialed 911. I caught an intruder in my house and had to subdue him, I said. He put up quite a fight, and I'm afraid I hurt him badly. I walked around to the front of the house, grabbed my bags, and went inside. I headed to the kitchen and noticed there were 4 cans of beer left. I wondered how Merrie would have explained the PBR since I was a bud drinker. I opened one, then made my way to the living room and sat on the couch, waiting for the response to my 911 call. Merrie walked into the room, dressed, and said, "We need to talk, honey." I cut her off internally. I didn't want to hear any excuses or apologies. No explanations about it being a one-time mistake or meaningless sex. I wasn't interested in hearing about how much she loved me or how we could work through this. All I wanted was for her to leave. The sound of the door closing behind her would be enough. Just let me know where you're going so I can serve you with divorce papers. Served? What do you mean? She asked. It means I'm divorcing you. I don't want a divorce. Well, you could have fooled me. Having a lover for over 3 years suggests you weren't invested in this marriage, so I'm ending it. That's bullshit, Barry. None of that is true. I got into a bad situation and couldn't get out. If you just let me explain. Okay, explain. It started the night you got angry and left me at the bar. I was drunk, and somehow Jim Reynolds got me out of the bar and into the parking lot. He took advantage of my state and slept with me. I was so out of it that I thought it was you. 2 days later, Jim came to see me with cell phone pictures of that night. He told me that if I didn't want you to see them, I had to sleep with him again. I panicked. I couldn't let you see those pictures, so I gave in. He means nothing to me, honey. Nothing at all. I just didn't know how to stop him from showing those pictures. Is that the whole truth? No more lies? Honestly, Barry, I swear on my mother's grave. I chuckled darkly. You're something else, Merrie. The only truth in that was you and Jim in the parking lot. Jim didn't have a cell phone, though. Want to explain Mike, Tony, or Kenny Hauser? I don't know what you're talking about. Did you miss the part where I mentioned a lover for over 3 years? I've had this house wired for a week. I have it all recorded. Everything you've done and said. You're caught, Merrie. I know it all. Every last detail. I finally get why you've treated me with such disrespect these past 3 years. Why you've constantly belittled and humiliated me. You can't respect someone you're cheating on and who you think is oblivious. Well, you might respect me now, Merrie, because I've finally taken action. You're not getting away with this anymore. Just sign the papers when you receive them next week. I've been more than fair given the situation. We'll split everything evenly, and I'll buy out your share of the house. I'll provide you with $2,000 a month in alimony for 2 years, or until you remarry, whichever comes first. Although, given what I've done to Jim's equipment, I doubt he'll be much of a husband to you. But there's Mike, Tony, and even Kenny to choose from. And yes, Kenny is either single or soon to be, as I'm giving his wife a copy of everything I have, and he'll be served around the same time as you. There will be no child support because I'm keeping the kids. I won't let them live with someone who has become such a disgrace. You'll have unlimited visitation every other weekend and half of their vacations. And let's be honest, Merrie, you wouldn't want them around to disrupt your sex parties. Just sign the papers. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll destroy all the evidence. If you don't sign, I'll go public with everything I have, and you won't be able to show your face in this town. You really hate me that much? I don't hate you, Merrie. I just have no use for a cheating partner, just as you apparently had no use for me these past 3 years. Merrie moved out and signed the divorce papers, when they were served to her. A week later, she was living with Tony. Whether she continued her parties with Tony, Mike, and the others is something I have no interest in knowing. Shelley served Kenny with divorce papers, and he reacted violently. He hit her, and that night, after he had fallen asleep, she used a cast-iron frying pan to give him a brutal wake-up call. She then dragged him out of the house and left him on the front sidewalk. The Friday after the papers were served, Shelley and I had our first date. I must say, things are looking promising.